Hello, Trailblazers. Welcome to another edition of Entrepreneur Journey. And I am super excited to have my friend Evans Putnam on the show today. And he's almost a neighbor. I used to live in the Charleston area. He lives there now, Charleston, South Carolina. And I love that place to death. My wife lived in the upstate, and I kind of lost that battle when we got married where we're going to live. So, and we're not only live in the same state, we have the same hairstyle, as you can see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was born in the upstate, so we just sort of swapped like parts of the state, right?
Yeah. So this isn't on the script, but when's the last time you were in the upstate?
Gosh, it's been a little while. It's probably been it's been a while. My wife goes up. We have grandparents up there, so my wife was just up there for the snow. She took my daughter up for the snow, but it's probably been a year and a half or so since I've been up there.
Oh, okay. Well, what I was going to say, if it's been a long time, Greenville's a very different city than it was like 5-7 years ago.
Yeah,
it's blowing up. So, anyway, not that our audience even knows anything about Greenville. Evans, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. My name's Evans Putman, and I like to use the title of the world's best podcast prosperity coach. So I help podcasting entrepreneurs with big positive messages and missions accelerate their profits, create more freedom, and change more lives using something that we call the podcast sales machine blueprint that I've developed over time. It was actually a strategy that has grown from a previous business that I was a part of that was a podcast, a failing podcast, and I was brought in sort of to help grow the audience, come up with a strategy for making money. And I, along with my partner, we ended up taking that from 0 to $500,000 in sales in the first 12 months that we implemented this system. And then we grew it to 150,000 monthly listeners. And we did this all organically. And after that happened, we went on to 7 figures. I started going out and teaching other people how to do the same thing. And then that business was actually sold. So we went from a podcast, just an idea. My partner was sharing his expertise in the real estate world. And we sold real estate sales training and coaching, et cetera. But it was just this idea, like, I want to share my message and mission and help people. And we turned it into an actual business that was not only scalable, but that was then sellable.
Nice. So that is also a little bit of a tease, because if you stay through the interview, there's going to be something nice that's going to be offered up at the end that you can tap into, and Evans can help you grow your podcasts, right? Isn't that what that's all about? Growing your podcast and monetizing it to where it can be a very nice piece of your business.
Absolutely. Yeah. We look at it. The way I always looked at it was almost like the fuel, like the car is the business, not the fuel, but the engine, right? Like we treated our podcast like the engine of our business. It brought in the traffic, the audience, took them through the whole customer journey, and ended up being how we sold people, not in the podcast, but as a result of the podcast on the other end. We created it and turned it into one big podcast sales funnel.
Nice. I'm anxious to hear more. So, but before we do that, let's get to know you a little bit more. So what's your favorite movie genre?
That's a funny question, because I don't know. We haven't known each other long enough to know if you are a parent or not, but myself as a parent, I think when I hit parenthood, my favorite movie genre became family movies, right? Before that, I would say it was probably a little bit more offbeat, sort of stuff that you didn't find in the multiplexes. You had to sort of go off the beaten path to find the movies, because I really like stories. Not necessarily all the action and all the flash and all the the special effects, but the actual stories. So but yeah, I think it's probably turned into like a family thing now, since that's sort of, as a parent, right, you realize at some point you don't have choice over the movies you get to watch anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So you better start liking them.
That's really interesting. So probably if you had your choice, it'd be more indie style movies that have a good story.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what I used to watch a lot of when I was pre-marriage, pre-children.
Well, I have a teenager, so it's opened up a little bit more when you get a teenager. It's not just Disney fare.
Yeah.
We can watch a little more PG-13 stuff. So.
And I'm moving in that direction. My daughter's 11 now, and so she's sort of found it. What I really enjoy is that she's found South Park clips,
Oh, nice.
the clean version of South Park clips, which I'm like, how do you find those? So she is like, we trade South Park little gifts back and forth in text all the time, and just we act like two children here. I'm the one that acts like I'm probably 8 or 9, a 9-year-old boy around her, and she's 11 now, right?
Nice,
so
nice.
We have a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So I can ask this question because we do have the same hairstyle. If you did have hair, how would you style it? Would it be like long and shaggy? Would you do a flat top? What would you do?
Well, hard to believe, and I have pictures to prove it. I used to have hair down below my shoulders when in a different version of myself back in the day. I lived in Los Angeles and I worked in the music industry. I had really long hair. We're talking, I'm an 80s child, right? So you think 80s hair metal type stuff. So obviously don't have that style anymore, right? But I would say nowadays it would probably be mohawk, because I'd like to have some hair, but I don't want to have all that hair. And I think it would sort of look cool to have like a, purple or blue mohawk on my head.
That would be pretty cool. That definitely would be cool.
I mean, think about branding, right? I mean, if you had that, I mean, there's a lot of guys that look like us, unfortunately.
Exactly.
We need to come up with like a new style. And I think that would be perfect. It would be like, oh, there's that guy, right? There's that podcast guy, the guy with the mohawk. So it would be easy.
If you see me in a future video and it seems like I've grown a mohawk, maybe I've just taped it on there and it's part of my brand now.
Right.
Oh, I'm a fan of superhero movies. We talked about movies before. So I want to ask you, if you could meet one of these superheroes, Spider-Man or Batman, who would you rather meet? If they were real, of course.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because you and I, earlier you saw I had like a Captain America mug here, which I was drinking some cacao out of. And for me, it was Spider-Man growing up, right? That's who I loved, Spider-Man. But if I was to sit down and have a conversation as an adult to somebody else, it would be Batman. Just because Batman has a lot more depth. He has that dark side of himself. Plus he's got all those cool toys, and you could go down into the Batcave and check out everything. I mean, it's just, I liked Batman growing up too, but I think having a conversation would be much better with Batman than Spider-Man.
I think he's the entrepreneur superhero.
Yeah. I think you'd have to say that, right?
Because he's what a lot of entrepreneurs aspire to be like, right? To have the free time. Not that we're going to go out there and beat up bad guys, but to have the toys that he has to kind of live the lifestyle that he lives.
He solves problems, right?
That's true.
When he has a problem, it's like, well, let's create this cool new toy that I get to use to now go do this thing. And it's really, definitely. So I think he is more of the entrepreneur. Plus he's got a nice bankroll too.
That's true. Yeah. And we use tools to accomplish what we need to accomplish. So that's very true. So now let's talk about your entrepreneur story. I want back to the hair days, right? Back to your beginnings, to where you are now. So if you could kind of fill us in, I know it's probably a lengthy story, but fill us in on all the highlights and lowlights if there are any.
Yeah. I mean, I'll jump back just to I always sort of had the entrepreneurial mindset, at least the mindset that I didn't want to work for anybody else. I won't say with anybody else, but for anybody else. But generally about just over 20 years ago is when you can say I sort of started in the online world of entrepreneurship. I was a personal trainer at the time. This was after I came back from the hair days of living this crazy wild life out in California. And I moved back to the East Coast. So I went from being very unhealthy to changing my life by getting healthy. And then I wanted to share that with other people, much like what we do as entrepreneurs. A lot of us have these things we've gone through that are just like, okay, this is sort of my gift. I've taken this thing that seems like it may not have been so great, became a gift. It helped me. I want to help others now too. So that sort of started me in the entrepreneurial world as a personal trainer. But while I was doing that, I had all these clients that I noticed had all these really cool things they were doing. Like one of them was an artist. Another one was she created these like handmade gas lanterns and wanted to start a business around it. There was another guy, you may have even heard of him, Tony the Peanut Man, that was down here that sold peanuts on the side of the road.
Oh no, not Tony, Chris. Chris, you know him. Look, he's the peanut dude. He's called the peanut dude now, but he's in Charleston there too.
And so these people were, and you know how Charleston is, right? A lot of crafts, a lot of art. So I, with my mindset, was like, how can I help these people with the other things they're doing? Because I had some insight and, you know, online stuff and an interest. So I actually created this website called Charleston Arts, etc. And it was like an e-com store. Now, if you think about it, back then I had no idea what it was, but I was selling. I got these guys to develop the website because back there was no ClickFunnels, right? There was no Stripe. I had this big giant machine in my house that weighed 100 pounds that I had to run credit cards through.
Oh my gosh.
Much different world, right? Back then it was a lot different, but that was really my first sort of digital marketing business. And I ended up moving from Charleston at some point after this. So I sold that business. I didn't make a lot of money, but I actually got a little bit of money. So I'm like thinking, oh, I just created something from scratch, helped some people, sold it, moved on. And then when I moved back to Charleston later, I started another business called Perfect Golf Vacations, where that was like my foray into the affiliate world. Because which back then I still like we didn't call it affiliate marketing, at least I didn't. I was still new to a lot of this, but I was learning how to write content, how to do SEO. And I was building I had this site that had these pages that ranked high, right? It had Google AdSense on them, but where I really made my money was actually worked through this company that sold, one company that did online tee times and the other one that sold golf vacations. So basically I would just go out to my mailbox and there'd be this check for like $700, $800 from a golf vacation package that I had sold through my website. So I was like an affiliate marketer / travel agent, right? But I didn't have to fulfill on anything and I loved it. So that was like my next foray and I learned a lot from that. And then I sort of moved into the consulting and freelancing world of marketing strategy after that.
Okay, I have a question about the golf thing. Did you have to get really adept at SEO before you started making money off of that?
I did, definitely. And then it was around the time where at one point, you know, Google ended up making some changes to their algorithms and it hit me hard. Then the company that was doing online tee times with us just decided out of the blue, like, hey, we're popular enough now. We're not giving anybody affiliate commissions anymore. So now I've got like 500 pages promoting this business. So instead of going through and removing everything, I just shifted gear. I was like, you know what? I'm going to do something different now. I'm like sort of done with this anyway. I've learned it. I know what I'm doing. So I shut that business down and moved on to the next thing. But it was, it was really cool because actually, you know how competitive keywords can be, and you know how Myrtle Beach, South Carolina is right up the road. I was ranking at one point in the top 3 and top 5 for golf vacation keywords in Myrtle Beach.
Wow.
So when that happened, all of a sudden it was like it turned on a flood of revenue. And then when they dropped, it was like the revenue disappeared. So it was really a lot of, I don't know when the checks are coming because back then they didn't have the affiliate programs weren't as nice as they are now, where you could just go check your dashboard and see what's going on. I would just randomly have a check show up. So I didn't know when I was getting paid. I didn't know when my pages were going to disappear off the face of the earth. So it was it was a good learning experience. So, cause a lot of it taught me a lot about figuring out keywords, writing copy, writing headlines, doing a lot of writing emails, creating a whole marketing ecosystem that sort of moved me to the next stage in my business. So each time I did something, I learned from it and took that to the next stage. And that next stage for me was basically just teaching other entrepreneurs what I had done, helping them with their content marketing and creating. I was doing freelancing and consulting at that point.
Okay. So now you're in the consulting space, right?
I'm more in the coaching and consulting space.
Okay, nice.
So,
and your primary audience is
entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, experts, speakers, book authors, if you think about the podcast world, because the part that we sort of jumped ahead on when I was doing freelancing and consulting, I started doing really well. My daughter was born. My wife was working as a general manager at a really nice restaurant here in town, but our lives were just in upheaval, right? Because she would get home at 2:00 in the morning, somewhere like that, get up bright and early. I mean, she got the short end of the stick. I mean, I have to give her a high five because she was pulling more weight than me, right? Getting up bright early in the morning. I'm in the office all day. She goes back to work. So we were like living together, but not really seeing each other. But
Ships passing in the night, right?
Yeah. And I enjoyed it. I mean, I didn't enjoy that part of it, but what I did enjoy was like being able to spend so much quality time with my daughter when she was young. But it was tough. It was tough on stress wise and everything. And then I started making enough money that my wife was like, why don't you just come home now? Everything's cool. We're doing really well. Now, take in mind too, I was also working a lot, right? So I was stressed. My health was not good. My mental health, physical health, both not great. Family life wasn't that great, even though the money was coming in. And a blessing in disguise was when I got lazy and wasn't filling my pipeline. And I had like 3 really good clients that were paying all the bills. Lost those clients, had 1 client left that was barely enough to like pay the utilities every month. So I started stressing out thinking, how am I going to get, I got to get a client. I beat myself up for like a day. Like, why the heck wasn't I filling my pipeline? Why'd I get lazy? But that's okay. Then I just reset the next day. I was like, I can go get more clients. This is where I sort of stumbled into the podcast world, because there I was looking at job sites, finding different people that were posting that they were looking for things, and at this point I was focusing on real estate, right? I was in the real estate niche because I had a license. I also had investments. So I quickly realized, and this is something for everybody listening, if you can like specialize around that niche, even as like a freelancer, if you're just a writer, an email marketing specialist or whatever, guess what you can do? You can like triple, quadruple your rates, because people look at you as the expert that will be able to help them, not a generalist in the email marketing field. So when I approach people in the real estate world, they were like, oh, he's got a real estate license, so he knows the business, right? Which I did, but I didn't practice, but I just got it to help with my taxes because I was investing also, right? So I had double-edged sword where I had the investment knowledge and the business knowledge. Well, I stumbled upon this guy that was he was in the real estate space. He was looking for somebody to help with show notes, right? And I mean, think about this. I'm making not multiple 6 figures, but above 6 figures previously. So all of a sudden writing show notes for like minimum wage was not really my thing. So there was something about the post and I went right past it, but it kept like just something about it. So eventually I went back to it. I found that post again. I reached out to the person and I was like, is it possible that you're looking for more than just show notes? Because it says you're struggling, that your audience isn't growing, that you don't have a monetization model. Would you like to discuss that and see? I was like, I can put something together, a whole package to solve all those problems. Keep in mind, I'd never done anything with a podcast before. Right. But I looked at it as a problem that could be solved. I was an entrepreneur and I could just apply what I had learned to it. Right. So that ended up being a great conversation. I ended up meeting my who's now my friend, later my business partner. I'd consider him a mentor. His name is Pat Hyben. And it turned out he lived in Folly Beach, South Carolina, which was even crazier for the people listening. Like, Doug knows what I'm saying, because we're sitting there like, shit. But basically 20 minutes, 30 minutes away on the other side of town on this island. Right. And so we met in person, developed a whole plan, and I won't go into everything because we struggled for a while. I mean, we struggled for a while until I actually sat down and decided that we got to go all in. We got to figure this out. I got to do this thing. We got some coaching help. Next thing you know, took it, like I shared earlier, $0 to $500,000 that first 12 months. We developed sales training for real estate agents, sold it through the podcast in a specific way where we created a podcast sales funnel. We weren't just where we were failing initially, we were pummeling people in the podcast, like buy our thing, buy our thing, buy our thing. So it was a big learning experience for me, but organically I applied content marketing strategies to the podcast, and it was things that other people weren't doing. And still most people don't do this. When I tell them this, like 3-4 years later, they're just like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. I'm like, but it's so obvious. Right. But it was what I knew how to do. It's like, how am I going to grow this thing? How am I going to grow this audience? I know content marketing. I've grown websites. I've grown email lists. I've grown, I've helped businesses grow their position online through content marketing. Why don't I just do the same darn thing for the podcast? So I created basically a content marketing strategy around the podcast that was a little different than what most people think of, because it was the only thing I knew how to do. Right. So I just did what I thought would work, and it worked.
Nice. I want to backtrack a little bit into your story, because I think there's a lesson there when you were talking about you had those 3 huge clients that dried up, right? That went away, and you were at that what pivot point, I guess is the best thing I can think of to call it. And you spent one day worrying about it, and then the next day you just started tackling the problem. So I love that. And I think the lesson there is don't get bogged down in defeat, right?
Absolutely.
Just start working on the solution.
And now that I look back on it, I mean, think about that. If that wouldn't have happened, none of this other stuff would have happened. And everything else that happened has been a huge blessing. My business is better than it's ever been. I work with some of the most amazing people. I'm able to help. What really drives me now is I'm able to work with people and see them get their message and mission out to the world. Right. And a lot of them already have a podcast, but the problem is that they don't have it. It's become a liability instead of an asset. They don't have it attached to their business. Then there's those that haven't even launched yet that are still sort of in that fear zone about, well, I want to do it, but what if I need to figure out how it's going to make money for me? I need to make sure people are going to listen so I can help them too. But it's generally, for me, when I start seeing these people and the changes they're making with their words, with their stories, it just blows me away. So none of that would have ever happened if I wouldn't have, faced that day where, I mean, literally my wife comes home from work 2 days later, I lose all our income. Right. And it's like, oh my gosh. But somebody was telling me like, hey, you need like you said, you need a hard reset. It's time to go in a different direction. And if sometimes we have to get hit like that with something to do that, right? Otherwise we stay in that quote unquote comfort zone, which I always tell my clients, I'm like, your comfort zone is not your comfort zone. It's actually uncomfortable, and it's going to lead to pain.
I went through that. I went through that whole comfort zone. That's part of my story. So we won't go into that, but I will say that I was in that same danger that you experienced, like where I was comfortable. I had this stable of clients. And at any point because I wasn't filling my pipeline either. Right. Because I had reached a level of comfort for me and my family, and I wasn't thriving. I wasn't looking to thrive, which is a dangerous place to be.
Absolutely.
Even if you're not even if it's not a financial situation where you're going to be in despair, you should always be filling your pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, once we turned on this whole podcast sales machine, what I call it now, it was like, we never had that problem again. I mean, right. We had 150 on average, we had 150,000 monthly listeners. So some months it would be 170, some months it might be 120, but it stayed right in that range. But it didn't start there, right? It took a while. It took some push, but here's what I tell people. I'm like, the initial pushing, like once we hit like a certain number, it was around like 75,000 monthly downloads, I think. Then all of a sudden it was like something flipped. And we never had to worry again. We weren't really even trying, and we were just growing and growing and growing and growing. And by the time I left to go and start doing this on my own, we had hit 4.5 million listeners, which I was like just blown away. I was like, how did we do this?
Well, you're going to
get it all organically too.
You're going to get another listener, because I haven't downloaded your podcast yet. So what is the name of your podcast?
Well, this podcast was called Real Estate Rock Stars with Pat Hyben, right?
Okay.
And so that is now sold. I'm
Oh,
actually
okay.
in the process of launching a new podcast around my new mission, which is the podcast sales machine. So you'll have to
Nice.
wait
Okay.
like a month for that. Well, actually, by the time this comes out, you'll be able to listen to it. But I would
Awesome.
highly recommend it because it's going to be for anybody podcasting. It will show you the roadmap for how to start growing your audience and how to start making a lot of money with your podcast, no matter what you're doing as an entrepreneur.
Nice. So let me ask you a little bit more questions around your expertise. What I noticed somewhere on your profile, you had talked about a small change that an entrepreneur could make that would create a flood of hyper eager buyers. Can you dive into that?
Absolutely. And this is like one of my favorite things to talk about because it's something that we don't often focus on. But I teach something once a month that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But in this, I always start with letting people know that the fastest way to create the eager buyers is basically that, right? To help create them, not to attract them, but to create them. And the way that I think most of us, and I was this way too, in the past, I felt like I had to just hit people with information. But now what we focus on is creating a transformation in your listener, right? In your prospect, even in your clients, so they can move to the next level, right? Because everybody needs the way I always word is like, you have to help these people be who they need to be to do the thing they need to do. And that thing that they wish to do is the thing that you offer, right? That desired result. You can't give them the keys to the car if they don't believe they can drive the car, right? Because then all they're going to do is fail. And what we've noticed, and we went through this a lot, right? When we were making a lot of money in the real estate space, there were some people that had that self-belief and they saw a lot of results. There were others that didn't get results. So you have to figure out that way. Okay, I can give them amazing information, but what they really need first is the belief in themselves that they can do the thing that you offer, right? And that your system is an easy way to do it. It's something that they can do, and that you are the person that's going to help them do it faster and easier than anybody else out there. So if you can help them be who they need to be to do the thing they wish to do, then you've created a group of eager buyers. And the thing is too, that they'll be successful. They'll take action on your programs and services. They'll be successful and everybody will win, right? At the same time.
Nice. So I have a question on that because you talk about transformation, and I'm big on delivering value before you even see anything monetary, right? Because
absolutely,
and I think that's kind of what you're alluding to is you give them some sort of value that leads to a transformation, and that sometimes this is even before a monetary transaction takes place, and that's
absolutely.
How you create the buyer, right?
Yeah, we actually have something called the Dream Client Content Framework that we teach within our podcasting systems. It is the way you create episodes that create transformations for your listeners, that help them overcome a false belief, help them overcome an objection, whatever it is that's holding them back, so they can take the next step. And generally that next step is a little bit closer to you, right? To working with you. So if you can we have a framework around this for 4 or 5 episodes that we launch with, that we relaunch with, or you can stick them in anytime you want to. But each individual episode, we actually have a framework we call it the Dream Client Content Creation Framework, because we believe that you can create, unlike what most people teach out there, you need to attract your dream clients. It's like, forget that, right? If you cast a wide enough net with your podcast, you can't really prevent people from listening to it, right? So they're going to come. Yeah, you can create the episode, like the headlines a certain way, your description, your theme, but you're still going to get a wider net, the wider part of the funnel. What you have control over is your content. So if you create that content a specific way and give them that transformation, you're actually creating, not just attracting, but creating your dream client. So you can mold people's beliefs in a way that by the time they get done listening to a certain amount of your content, they are like the perfect client to work with you. And they believe they can do it, and they believe that, and they will take action on it. And you know that they can be successful with it. So it's not necessarily a selfish thing. It's great that you're creating your dream clients and your eager buyers, but it's good for them too, because we want them to succeed, and it sets them up for success.
That is awesome. That right there is enough reason for anyone listening to go and check out what we're going to talk about here in a minute. One thing that came to mind when you were saying that is, who I believe is a master of that and has been for a long time is Tony Robbins, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's how he's gotten as big as he is, I believe, because he's been able to have those people take that transformation and then they were sold.
Absolutely, right? Yeah.
So.
And if you look at it, that's really a lot of what we base our frameworks around, and it's storytelling. But it's, I mentioned earlier, my favorite movies always had really good stories in them. It's the same thing, right? Telling the kind of stories that bring the listener in, that they can visualize themselves, almost creating like a mind movie, right? That they're in that story, but the story is giving them a gift of transformation, right? It's not just saying, here's the 5 steps to increase your leads, right? It's creating a story around why you want to do what it was like before you had that system, what it's like after, and how easy it is, and that anybody can do it. And if you start listening to your clients and your prospects and what they're saying to you, you can just come up with podcast content all the time, because they're telling you where they're stuck. They're telling you their false beliefs. They're telling you what's holding them back, or what they believe is holding them back. And it's all you have to do is to get them to overcome that. But a lot of what we teach, we look at a lot of speakers out there that are out sharing, not necessarily podcasters, but speakers, because you mentioned Tony Robbins. I mean, he is when he's up there speaking, he's bringing you into these stories. He's like touching on emotions, on feelings. He's getting you to feel things. He's getting you to feel the pain, but also feel what it's like to get through the pain. And if you start paying attention to these speakers that are out there, motivational speakers that are out there just crushing it, then you take sort of what they're doing and bring it into your podcast. So that's a tip for everybody, is just start sort of wide, and don't just listen to other podcasters. I mean, there's a lot of great podcasters, and I love listening to different ones for different styles, but start looking at people that are up on stage in front of, 5,000 people, and are getting these people to like just flip a switch in their brain emotionally, mentally, and just say, I can do this thing. Right. And if you can start patterning your stories after the same type of frameworks that they're doing, then you'll be able to create those same feelings and beliefs in your listeners in podcasts.
That's a fire tip for sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So another thing, on one of your videos, I saw you wore a shirt that said servepreneur. Tell me what that means to you.
Well, that actually came to me. That's actually my shirt. I created that for multiple reasons. There was one reason was because my daughter was giving me grief because I always wore ClickFunnels shirts, because Russell Brunson's been one of my mentors, one of my coaches. I was actually blessed that ClickFunnels purchased and licensed my podcast training and put it in their high ticket program.
Nice.
Which I think it's still there, right? But that was sort of like, I came full circle. I went from like going to Funnel Hacking Live, we were failing in our business, to getting coaching, getting to meet Russell, like at some of the mentor or the coaching things that we did. And then just all of a sudden, then I get the call like, hey, we want to buy your program and stick it in our high ticket program. So it came full circle. But because of that, I always wear ClickFunnels shirts. And my daughter one day just looked at me, and here's the funny, it was like, I'd heard this before. I heard a story one time where Gene Simmons, which I'm sure everybody knows Gene Simmons from Kiss, right? Great businessman. I don't know about musicianship, but great businessman. And he told this young group of kids came up, they were in a band and they were wearing Kiss shirts. He's like, so you guys are in a band? They're like, yeah. And he's like, why aren't you wearing your own t-shirts? Mm. my daughter actually looked at me one day and just like out of the blue said the same exact thing. She's like, why are you always wearing somebody else's t-shirts? So to go back to the servepreneur thing, I started focusing on myself a lot, right? When I left that other business, when we sold the business and I was going out to work on my own, I had some time where I could do meditation and some sort of like morning routines. And I remember that word came to me at one point, and like a whole sort of thought process behind it. And really what it means to me is that the way I serve others, right? I always lead with value. Like you mentioned it too. I don't, Joe Polish wrote a book called Life Gives to the Giver. I think that's the name of it. Right. And that's sort of like, long story short, that's what it means to me. It means to serve others, right? Serve without expectation. Right. Live your life. I actually learned that like too from the experiences I went through. Live your life without expectation. It makes it much easier. Right. It also makes you not be afraid of failure, because it's like, just try the thing, just do the thing. Because if you have no expectation on a desired result, right, that you're tied to it, you won't suffer if you end up not getting that result. But you can just look at it as like, okay, didn't work, just a data point. Let's move to this thing now. Right. So for me, that's really what it means. And I think it was Dan Sullivan in one of his books I was reading. He said something, and I'm not going to quote it because I know the quote's not right, but to paraphrase it, he said something like, you will never have to worry about cash flow again when you stop worrying about yourself and you focus on the aspirations of others, what they desire to achieve, and listen to them, help them achieve it. And you'll get everything that you're supposed to get. Everything will work out for you. So for me, it's sort of a philosophy, and it's something, but it's a shirt that I created just to get my daughter off my back so I could have my own t-shirts too. But then of course she wasn't impressed when I did it. So you can't win, right?
Right. And I think there's something in there too about sales, right? Because that's the number one sales tip. If you don't want to struggle with sales anymore, don't invest so much in the outcome. Invest in what you want the other person to achieve.
And this circles back to our business, right? The reason, and we have a mutual friend that you had on your podcast recently, Chris Baden.
Mm-hmm. Awesome
and I was
guy.
Interviewed on his podcast, and it's all about sales. And so we were on there talking about this, and he was like, well, can you share the big tip on how y'all went from $0 to $500,000? I was like, oh, it's easy. We quit selling. Right.
Yep.
Like, we used this thing, and I just made it up on the spot. I was like, we had this thing that we created. It was called the sales without selling method. And he was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, I know, I just made that up right now. But really we did what you said. We started focusing on serving and giving in a way that we actually created a strategy that was ridiculous, that got our opt-in rate was 78.6% on listeners from, and I remember that number specifically because I was just always like, holy crap, are we going to ever, go lower than this? But it hovered. I'm 8 out of 10 people that landed on our page from our podcast to our thing got on our list. And it was because we quit selling and we focused on creating this ridiculously amazing tool to get people on our list. And just to tell everybody, I'll give everybody what it was. It was basically, we created a free membership site that by the time I left had 200 items in it.
Wow.
But here's the key. They weren't just random things. They were actual items that you could use as a real estate agent, put it in your business that day, go grab one of them. Like if you need to get a nail in the wall, you grab the hammer, right? So you could grab whatever you needed for your business, start utilizing it and make money. And we actually had a guy come up to us in person at Funnel Hacking Live at an event the next year we went. And he told us, he was like, I came in, I opted into your free agent success toolbox area, grabbed this listing, like presentation thing, went out, got one of my very first listings, got a commission check for like $5,000 or $6,000 from a free thing. Right. Nice. And so by doing that, we actually, I I actually did call our method this, right? This is one I didn't just make up off the top of my head in an interview one day, but we called it the Reciprocity selling system. So it was after a lot of interviews like this with people like yourself pointing out some of these things that reminded me, I was like, that's exactly what we did. We quit selling. We focused on serving. We gave so much value, but it wasn't just value like, hey, take my PDF, kind of thing. It wasn't transactional value. It was transformational value that really helped people get a result, because as soon as that guy got that result, guess what he did? He came back and bought our program for a lot more money, because he's like, I know they can help me. I trust them now because they just helped me. So we called it the Reciprocity selling system. It's what we teach in our podcast sales machine blueprint, because it's based on the law of reciprocity. Just give, serve, help, create that transformation that we talked about, move people closer and closer to seeing that they believe in themselves, then help them get a win. And then they're your client for life at that point, right? As long as you treat them right after the transaction. Wow,
nice. So I stalked you on your profile before. So before this interview,
we all do, right? So, how do you think I knew you were from? I immediately like, hey, do you live in Charleston?
Yeah. And so another thing, I'm just going to bring up another thing because you put out such good content. I'm going to bring up another piece that you put out there, and it's talking about accelerating revenue when you accelerate relationships. I know this is going to vibe with me a lot because I'm super big on growing relationships. So I want to hear your take on this because this is one of my favorite things.
Yeah, this is what we teach in our program too, as part of something we call the immersion conversion method. And it's based on scientific proof, where by getting in front of people a certain amount of hours, in a certain amount of locations, in a certain amount of touch points, you create an emotional bond with that person. Right now, obviously, you got to give good value, right? You can't just like show up and be ridiculous and they've created a bond, right? So we focus on that, and we compress time using our podcast and using, getting on other shows, in your own podcast, in the content you put out that draw people to your podcast, your email delivery. Everything is compressed through this immersion conversion method to accelerate that relationship, to make it happen faster. Because what we do is when people join, we want them to binge on your content. We want to create like that Netflix effect with your podcast content, so they quickly accelerate the relationship, right? They go from sort of knowing about you because they saw your podcast. They may have stalked your Facebook profile. Then they come in, they start listening. Now they've listened to like 5-6 hours of you in a really short time period. They're getting some of your emails, and now they see, oh, like there goes Doug, he's on this podcast, I'm gonna go check him out over there too, hear a different side of you over there. But you've accelerated that relationship in a way that it's created an emotional bond between you and the listener. And then if you think about everything else we've talked about, right, and then you help move them forward in that relationship by help giving them the transformation, the belief in themselves to move to the next step. Then they opt into your thing. Now they're a prospect, and then they're a client, right? So it's all about, and here's the thing that I'll share, a big tip. One of the biggest tips I've learned that is really helps accelerate that relationship for everybody out there listening that has a podcast. Even if you don't have a podcast, if you're, whatever you're doing, the biggest mistake I see that podcasters, when they don't monetize the way they could, whether it's selling their own high ticket programs, which is what we guide people to do, is not moving people to the next step where it goes from one-way conversation to two-way conversation, right? And there's a lot of ways you can do this, right? You can move people from your podcast to a Facebook group. And in that Facebook group, you can have Facebook Lives where they could actually come on like a Zoom, and you could speak back and forth. You're creating a two-way conversation, a real human interaction. Imagine that, right? But it's the same thing with a lot of people that are running challenges. If you're running a challenge, a live challenge where you're answering questions and you're helping people, if you're moving people to a live masterclass, if you're moving people to a live, even if it's just a live regular Zoom calls, whatever it is, try to move them from your podcast to a place where you can create a two-way conversation, a human interaction. Because when you start doing that and people feel like you're acknowledging them, you're listening to them, and you actually are celebrating them when they have a victory, then that creates a real strong human bond with your listener and with your audience. So it's something that we forget about, right? In the online world, it's like we take it for granted, but it's huge, creating that human connection, and could be a game changer for your business.
I totally agree. And there's several things that I do in my group and just in my sales funnel process that make sure that we try and build that human interaction. So yeah, I totally get it. And we're leading up to the big moment where we're going to talk about where all this stuff is implemented, right? The podcast sales machine. So tell us a little bit, tell us as much as you want to about the podcast sales machine.
Well, yeah. So the podcast sales machine came from everything that we did in the past, right? Everything I learned in that original business that we grew beyond 7 figures through the podcast, the way we got leads, the way we created dream clients, the way, we were able to move people to another conversation, the way we were able to accelerate relationships. So basically we started taking that and turned it into a coaching program. But we also created a masterclass. So people get to spend 4 hours with me. And then also if they do the VIP, they get to spend extra hour with me, sometimes more than that, but that's something that we don't share until we always throw them a bone and say, hey, come later and we'll do even another private Q&A session. But we get private coaching, but you actually get to come to that masterclass and learn the exact blueprint of the podcast sales machine. So it's all for helping you sell more high ticket offers and creating a large audience of eager buyers for your offers, whatever that can be. And so it's perfect for people if they haven't launched a podcast. It's perfect for people if they have, but they're not monetizing it the way they want to. They're not turning it into a sales machine. One of the things that I love the most that my past partner said was he looked at me and he was like, you know what? He was like, it's like we've turned this podcast, which was just a labor of love, into a virtual ATM that just brings me high ticket clients, brings sales on autopilot, and I get to do what I like to do. And that's just share my message and my mission. And so that's really, for me, it's like, you know what, if you're a podcasting entrepreneur with a big positive message and mission, you have to have revenue to keep your mission going, right? You can't. And the more you make, the more people you can reach. And that's what I always tell people too. I'm all for making as much money as possible, as long as you continue to expand those you serve and keep growing that purpose. So that's what we teach in the podcast sales machine. It's a 4-hour masterclass with a VIP area that, like I said, the VIP area, you get private Q&A and coaching from myself and my partner, Michelle Abraham, who we haven't even touched on her yet, but she has helped launch over 300 shows, 300 podcasts. Every podcast that she works with is in the top 5% in the world right now. And we're both blessed to have a lot of clients. Some of our clients have had $1 million days. Some of them, make multiple millions every year. So we work with all levels. No matter where you are in your business, we're going to help you get to the next place you want to get. And it all starts in that podcast sales machine masterclass.
Awesome. So if somebody wanted to find out more about that, where would they go? And do you have anything special for the viewers of Entrepreneur Journey or listeners?
Yes, absolutely. For your folks, what we did was we talked about the VIP, and what we're going to do is we've got that private Q&A, the VIP section. We're going to give them 2 of those. So that's a bonus for your listeners, viewers, wherever they're consuming this. Also, instead of the $97 for the VIP ticket, they can get it for $47. If they use on the checkout page, they can just put in the word Doug, put in your name and the little discount code area. They can get their ticket to the masterclass for free. And then on the next page, they'll actually be prompted to join the VIP. But I would highly recommend that, because there's been people that have come out of that and have left and have like reached out to me and said, I just sold a high ticket program just by getting an answer to a question. So the ROI on this is ridiculous. So just use your name, Doug, and the coupon code. We'll throw in a bonus Q&A session for them. And we'll also, we'll also give them the discount on the price for the VIP ticket. And we run these every month. So whenever you're listening, you can come over and check it out. It's at podcastsalesmachine.com is the URL, podcastsalesmachine.com.
That is amazing. I just can't believe how you have opened my mind to all the possibilities of a podcast. Like this is a podcast and I've been running it for a while, but I feel like a lot of ways I'm just scratching the surface of what it could be. And if you have a podcast, you're probably just scratching the surface of what it could be. So I highly, highly recommend that you take up the offer of attending the masterclass, which, if I heard you right, it's free to get into that, but you just pay to go to the VIP sessions, which you've just gotten a discount for by using my name, Doug.
And doubled the sessions for you. So.
And double the sessions. So there's no reason that you wouldn't leave with that, with some actionable stuff that you could take and go make some money, more money from your podcast.
Yeah.
So,
and I will say too, Doug, like the VIP session, something that we do with the VIP that's a little different too, is you'll actually be on Zoom where you can interact and ask questions throughout the whole process, where the general session takes place in our Facebook group. So I can't monitor the comments. We have somebody in there that monitors the comments, but all the good stuff happens in the Zoom, right? Where you can get your questions answered even throughout the 4 hours. So even during the general session, you'll get more opportunity to get coaching and questions answered.
Quick question on that. Is it just you in the VIP, or is it your business partner? Was her name Melissa?
Michelle and I are both.
Michelle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Michelle and I are both in there.
That's
and you'll
a very
actually
key
meet
point.
Michelle tomorrow when you come to the Connect and Collaborate thing.
Nice. Yes. Awesome. Well, it has been a pleasure having you on the show today, Evans. And do you have any parting words for entrepreneurs?
No, what I'll say is, and I'll go, you know what, this is what I'll share, because this is funny. This popped up in my Facebook feed the other day, and it was sort of apropos for what we were talking about like the struggle of, when I lost those clients and everything. Failure and success are both part of the journey. So if we keep remembering that, right, failure and success are both part of the journey. Just keep moving forward, right?
I just had another podcast guest recently say, and it resonated with me too, is that the only time you really fail is when you quit.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. And one day you'll look back and you'll be like, that biggest mistake that I thought was like, that it felt like so painful at that moment, could have been the thing that just knocked you in a different direction that you were meant to be, right? Like the big thing you were meant to do, like it did for me. And like, it sounds like it did for you also.
Mm-hmm.
So people need to just remind themselves that, who was it? Sean Stevenson said that the life is not like, life isn't done to you, it's done for you, or something like that, right? If you start thinking of it that way, everything is here for me. It serves me in a certain way. We get to decide. We get to respond and decide which way we're going to take it. So like you said, we can quit and then it is a failure, or we can just keep moving forward.
Thank you again, Evans. And until next time, entrepreneurs, keep blazing your trail.
Thanks, Doug.